Hello, listeners, and welcome back to another episode of Down a Rabbit Hole with me, your host, CCSUAREZ. Today, we're going to be covering yet another family annihilator case. I feel like there are enough family annihilator cases to get us through the rest of the year, but today we're going to be discussing Robert William Fisher. In Scottsdale, Arizona, on April 10th, 2001, an explosion could be heard from miles away, the flames reaching up to 20 feet in the air. The structure was burnt to the ground, and 3 bodies were found inside: Mary, Brittany, and Bobby Fisher. One person, however, wasn't found: husband and father, Robert William Fisher. To this day, 21 years later, Robert is still missing. The opinions expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect those of the Down a Rabbit Hole podcast. Sensitive topics are discussed. Viewer discretion is advised. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13th, 1961 in Brooklyn, New York. His father was William Fisher, a banker, and his mother was Jan Howell. He has 2 sisters that attended the same high school with him in Tucson, Arizona. His parents divorced in 1976 when he was only 15 years old. After that, him and his sisters went to go live with their father in Arizona. According to his friends and relatives, the divorce was something that really affected him, and it seemed that he really blamed his mother for a lot of the hostility and really just everything that went wrong in their family and in his parents' divorce. A family friend from high school even stated that it seemed that Robert was, quote, very bitter about it. Fisher apparently talked to a couple of his coworkers at the Mayo Clinic as well around the same time as these murders that he allegedly committed, and he told one of his coworkers that his life would have been very different if Jan, his mother, had not left the family. So it sounds like someone has some mommy issues, which is very common in middle-aged murderers. Fisher enlisted into the U.S. Navy and attempted to become one of the Navy SEALs, but he was not successful. If you are unaware, when you join the Navy and if you do want to become a part of the SEALs, it is very rigorous, very intense training, and not a lot of people make it through. Fun fact, my husband and I actually had a friend who went to SEAL training and hurt his leg, is the story that we heard, and he did not make it through. He had to ring the bell, as they call it, and it essentially is saying that you quit. It's very sad. He was an avid and talented outdoorsman and hunter and fisherman, to say the least. He really had a knack for it. He worked as a firefighter in California, but was forced to retire after a back injury, and then he moved his family to Arizona and started his career in the medical field. He worked as a surgical catheter technician, which sounds awful, and a respiratory therapist as well. And he was actually a surgical technician at Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale at the time of the murders. Robert and Mary Cooper married in 1987. He was described as a cruel and distant control freak towards his family, which is very interesting because people that are close to them and actually knew what was going on within their household, that's how they described it. However, a lot of the neighbors and people in their church described them as the perfect all-American family, and just that he was the best dad and best husband, and they were high school sweethearts, and they painted this entirely different picture. And I think it's very interesting how a lot of times, and nothing against people who are involved in their churches or who are Christian, but it is very interesting that that is how their relationship and their life was depicted by people who were involved in their church. And then people who are a little bit more realists were like, no, he was horrible and had dead eyes, which if you do look at pictures, it does look like he's dead in the eyes. And then also reviewing footage from their home videos, and I will have all of that linked with my sources. There's a lot of the home videos that were used for the documentary, or one of the documentaries. I think it might be the only one, but I believe there are 2. I watched one of them, and it is so creepy. And just the way that him and his wife were interacting with each other, and little things that they were saying and their facial expressions were really, really creepy, to say the least, and something that really makes you, or at least made me, uncomfortable as I was watching them. So I will have those in the show notes on Spotify and all other listening apps, and then also on YouTube. I will have those linked in the description box. And I will have pictures of their dog, the car, the house, the family, all of that over on Instagram. So make sure that you are following on Instagram. That is Down a Rabbit Hole Podcast on Instagram. We also do trivia as well. It was also alleged that Robert and his wife fought about sex and money and about Mary taking a job that she told her friends was a, quote, security fund. And then also it was alleged, and I'm saying it was alleged because I don't know this to be the truth, but obviously it's, from firsthand accounts or secondhand accounts rather, that Mary has told this to her friends and these little excerpts and stories from their marriage. So that's why I want to make sure I'm saying it like that. Fisher once turned a garden hose on Mary and sprayed her with it after he perceived her to have spoken out of turn. And then also Fisher was embarrassed that his son Bobby didn't like to hunt or fish and once tried to teach his daughter Brittany how to swim by throwing them off of the boat. And his hunting partner, Sandy, had said they were crying and Brittany was screaming, and he pulled them back into the boat and he said, "Now there, how was that?" Robert also wouldn't allow Mary to paint any of the walls inside the house other than just a white color. And then he didn't want many things to be hung on the wall other than like small pictures and only a few of them. And then Mary's friend Kimberly said that several times her mother had made special things like quilts and that Mary wasn't allowed to hang them up and she had to store them all in a closet, and that he would continually tell her, "Isn't it time you get rid of all of this stuff?" So all of that is going on, and all of that just seems so controlling and unhealthy and abusive. That is a form of abuse, that control. However, he's trying to uphold this image of a devoted, perfect family man. And I wouldn't say that this is mirroring one of the last ones we went over, the Chris Watts case, because he just was obviously the worst. Obviously, all of these cases we go over, the family annihilator is the worst person ever. However, I do think this is really mirroring John List, the one who also went on the run. He was caught 20 years later, and actually we are just over 21 years as I'm recording this, that Robert Fisher has been on the run. So hopefully there is a little trend there, and that is around the time that they do get caught. A huge difference here is, obviously there are a little bit of differences all over, but a huge difference here is that Robert Fisher was able to live off the land and is someone who would have been able to go into hiding. He was very good at hunting. He lived in a great area where you could just literally go into the mountains and not be seen. And he, like I said, and like the investigators and his friends said, that he was someone who could live off the land for a very extended amount of time. And with the first case we went over, John List, he would not have been able to do that. But they all had mommy issues, and it seems like wanted to uphold this perfect fatherly, masculine persona, and were just disappointed in everyone in their family for not upholding that. Now, Mary's mother, Jenny Cooper, told investigators that Fisher didn't socialize often with family because of a fear of getting too close to people and losing them. And then Robert's own mother, Jan, who, like we discussed, he blamed everything on, not the killings, but like his life going awry. She told investigators that she had been a yes sir wife who did not stand up to Fisher's father. She added that she saw similar dynamics early in Fisher's marriage to Mary that she had spoken to her about regarding her concerns. A close friend of his stated that his family bore a striking resemblance to that of his childhood, which is absolutely terrifying. But it is important to see where all of these actions and ideals come from, and clearly it's, or at least in my opinion, coming from how he was brought up. Fisher had been a hunter and an outdoorsman since he was a young adult. Friends noticed him exhibiting disturbing behaviors while on hunting trips, though. Multiple of his friends had said that they didn't want to go hunting with him anymore or on any of these weekend trips because they didn't feel safe with him. It wasn't like he enjoyed the sport of it. And I can't relate to hunting because I have never been, but I can relate to fishing. The thing with fishing is it's the sport of it that you enjoy, and the time and being out on the water and the camaraderie, just like with hunting, but it's not the killing of the fish. That's not the part that you enjoy. The part that typically, I mean, at least I know what I enjoy is the waiting around and the sport of it all, and trying to, reel in a fish that is very, a fighter like a Jack or a Tarpon. And I personally love that. It's not the blood and the killing. So in one of these cases, when one of his friends was with him, after killing an elk, he began smearing the blood on his face. And on another occasion, he snuck up behind a family that was picnicking and emptied his gun into the air. So he was just shooting his gun in the air. Several years before his wife and children died, Fisher shot a stray pit bull, just straight up killed a dog. He claimed that he shot it because it attacked his Labrador retriever, but police maintains that he orchestrated the encounter because he wanted to shoot the dog. Fisher had been an active participant in the Scottsdale Baptist Church men's ministry, but in contrast to Mary, had begun to withdraw from any of these activities prior to the murders. So he was pulling away and distancing himself from everybody, it seems. Also, there have been a lot of people who have said, and we'll talk about it later about the dog. His name was Blue. He was a black lab. And a lot of people have said, he took the dog with him. So clearly, like, he loved the dog and he didn't want to kill the dog. I don't think if you love a dog, you are going to let a stray pit bull attack it. And it seems like that's what he wanted to happen, just so that he could shoot the stray pit bull and like not get arrested for that. Very strange. I don't think he loved anybody. I think that he had a lot of issues, but we will get into that more later. Now, only 3 years before the murders, in 1989, the Fishers went to their senior pastor of their church for marital counseling. Fisher later also told coworkers about a one-night stand, or a one-night affair, if you will, that he had with a sex worker that he met in a massage parlor. And I say massage parlor, but that sounds weird. He went to some place like, I don't want to say like Massage Envy or anything like that. I don't want to get sued by them, but he started going to these certain places to help with his back injury. A lot of people do that, right? There's massages and things like that can help. But there are a lot of these places that are fronts for sex work and then also for human trafficking as well. I know there have been a lot of stings for that and investigations for that in the Tampa area where I live, and it is absolutely wild. There's one that just cannot be shut down, and everyone knows what goes on there. It is absolutely wild. I don't know why that one hasn't been shut down here yet, but I don't want to say that, it's just so crazy that he, met a sex worker there, but it's actually not that uncommon. Robert was actually worried that Mary would find out about it because he got a UTI that caused them to be pretty sick for a few days in December of 2000. And I must be an idiot, but I never knew, or I don't see UTIs, a sexually transmitted disease. I mean, as a woman, many of us know you gotta run to the bathroom or slide off the bed, run to the bathroom and tinkle right after, or else you will most likely get one. Also, women can just be really prone to them. I know they're more common in women, but I don't really see it as an STD or an STI, which is interesting. But hey, it really is just bacteria. It's typically just E. coli, which is the most common one. I know far too much about them when it comes to women. 1, because I'm a woman, and 2, because I have literally gotten like 5 of them over the past year. As I take a sip of water because I'm dehydrated. All right, where were we? Now, according to a couple of Robert's friends, he spoke of committing suicide around 1998, which is interesting that was the time that they actually went to marital counseling. And apparently the reason why he was contemplating suicide, or even discussing it, talking about it, mentioning it, was because he was just so upset over the condition of their marriage and where they were and just how unhappy, I guess, they were and how it seemed to just be unraveling. A former neighbor of theirs, Wade Russick, I'm sure I'm butchering that name, but Wade, good old Wade, said they did not have a happy marriage. Way to go, Wade. Tell the truth. They screamed constantly. Everybody heard it. You could hear it in the house next door. And you never really heard him scream, which was kind of weird. I mean, he had that way about him. But you never ever heard him scream. You always heard her screaming things like, "You're worthless. I could have done better than you. We should get a divorce." And that's actually one thing that I do want to discuss as well, because you have to be screaming so loud, not only for people in the house next door to you to hear you, but then also for them to understand what you are saying. So for instance, one of our neighbors, who has since moved out, and now we have a new amazing neighbor. But one of our old neighbors a couple years ago, it was a woman and her grown son. He was in his late 20s, early 30s. And she would yell at him all the time for doing drugs or stealing money or clogging their toilet with throw up and paper towels. It was a very strange situation over there. But she would scream at him constantly. I couldn't hear what she was saying from me being inside my house. It would be very muffled. So, of course, I am a nosy bitch. So I would go outside and, just listen, because I am, again, a nosy bitch. Who doesn't do that? Come on, you pretend you're gardening or vacuuming your driveway when you hear a commotion, right? So I would go listen, and then I'd be able to hear them better. But I think that just shows how loud their fights were. But again, it does seem like Robert was the type of person who would just not scream back, but instead just hold it all in and then eventually explode, no pun intended, since he did blow up their house. Robert also told one of his friends that he was renewing his commitment to his faith and his marriage because he, quote, could not live without his family, possibly hinting that he would consider suicide over divorce. He was also quoted as to saying, divorce is never an option, which is interesting that murder is an option and divorce is not. That is, it just shows how irrational this type of thinking is. According to psychologists, an intense fear of loss is not unusual amongst individuals who were traumatized by a divorce in their adolescence. Mary told several of her friends that she was going to divorce Fisher in the weeks before her murder. On April 9th, 2001, at around 10 p.m., a neighbor reported hearing a very loud argument coming from inside the Fisher home. And that was approximately 10 hours before it exploded into flames. Police theorized that the murders took place between 9:30 p.m. and 10:15 p.m. At 10:43 p.m., Fisher was spotted on an ATM camera where he withdrew $280. Mary's Toyota 4Runner was in the background of that video from the ATM camera. It is possible that he returned later to the house to commit the murders, but the police believe that they had already taken place by then because he was using Mary's car. Now, I do always give a trigger warning at the beginning of these episodes, and obviously this is primarily a true crime podcast, so you should know what to expect. But we are about to talk about the murders. It is extremely gruesome and just very, I don't want to say scary, but just very troublesome, triggering, whatever word you want to put there. It's all of them. Now, Mary was shot in the back of the head, and her throat was also slit. I say also slit because Brittany and Bobby's throats were slit as well. But all three of them, the cuts were so deep, their heads were almost decapitated. Now, he was a hunter. And again, trigger warning, but the way that it was described, because I have looked over the police report and all that, and again, I will have that linked with my sources, but I have watched a lot of content about this as well, and heard and read what a lot of the investigators said as well, but the slashes on the throats of the victims, of the family members, resembled that of when you are bleeding out a deer or an animal that you have just killed, which is, of course, what he did. He was a hunter. But like I said, Mary was also shot in the back of the head, and that just seems like such overkill. And I really hope that he did not make her watch him do this, but I believe that he probably would have killed the children first and then killed her and slit her throat and then shot her in the back of the head just as an extra FU. Now, all of that, like I said, was around 10 p.m. on April 9th. 2001. The next morning at 8:42 a.m., the house exploded. Firefighters were immediately alerted to the explosion, which was strong enough to collapse the front brick wall and rattle the frames of the neighbors' houses for 1/2 mile in all directions. And if you do watch the documentary on it, again, I will have it linked down below, you can actually hear all of the 911 calls. There are so many, and people are freaking out, and it's very telling, and I think it is a very good illustration of just how massive this explosion was and just how loud it was. Now, before firefighters arrived, neighbors used garden hoses to try to keep the flames under control. Firefighters kept the 20-foot high blaze from spreading to other houses, thank goodness. A series of smaller secondary explosions went off, and investigators think that it was because there were, paint cans, but then also there was quite a bit of ammunition in the house as well. And all of that did force them to keep their distance. And only one firefighter, thankfully, had injuries to his leg, and it was because he lost balance and fell near the fire and near the flames. Now, the gas line from the back of the house, from the furnace, had been pulled. And that gas that was just spilling into the house was ignited by a candle that Fisher had, again, allegedly lit. So that gas line was just pumping the house full of gas. And then because there was that little bit of flame, it just absolutely made the house explode. So that actually gave him a lot of time to get away. And I believe that around 10:43 was when, that was when he started his getaway. So that ATM that he went to was on his way to running, essentially. Now, there are so many theories, and we're going to get into a bunch of them a little bit later as well, but some people do think that Robert started the fire, or rather just blew up his house, because he wanted them to think that he had also died in the fire. But he was a firefighter, so therefore he knew what to do to, what type of accelerant would create the biggest explosion and destroy evidence, but he also would have known that that type of explosion isn't going, one, it's going to be really loud. The people are going to get to it quickly. And yes, it is going to be powerful. Yes, it is going to be really hot and be able to destroy a lot of things and essentially the whole house, but it's not going to get rid of that much evidence. Bodies don't just melt in fire. That's not how that works. So, and his body wouldn't have just disappeared, and they would have been like, oh yeah, his body just completely turned into ashes. That's not what have happened, and he knew that. He was not a big old dum-dum. So I personally don't know why he did, the extra FU of making the house explode and just completely blowing up your family's dead bodies as well. But there were a couple things in this case that I'm like, why would you do that? Investigators did theorize that Robert murdered his family because he felt threatened that Mary was going to leave him and that she was absolutely wanting to divorce him, and then also killing his kids because he didn't want them to go through what he went through as a child. Robert wasn't listed as a person of interest until a few days later. They were just thinking, oh, maybe he's actually on a hunting trip and he's gonna come back and be like, oh dear God, my house exploded, what happened to my family? But after speaking with people who knew him and knew them and about their relationship, and then also investigating a little bit, they decided, okay, yes, this is probably what happened. And then also Mary was shot in the back of the head with the same gun that was missing from the house, because he did have quite a lot of guns, and people who hunt typically do have a lot of different rifles and things like that. I mean, also he was in the Navy as well, but a lot of people who hunt have, some people have entire rooms dedicated to that, not just, a gun safe or things like that. Now, on April 20th, the last physical evidence of his whereabouts surfaced when Mary's car, the Toyota 4Runner, was found in Tonto National Forest, which is a place where he was very, very familiar with. Keep that in mind. And it's about 100 miles north of Scottsdale. Blue, the goodest boy Blue, the dog, was found outside the car. He was also, he was curled up under the car. He'd nestled himself in there. And he did have porcupine little quills in his nose. So again, bringing the dog with you there's a bunch of different theories I have for that. And again, we'll go over that in a second. If the dog wasn't involved, then I would be like, okay, he just killed himself, or okay, he's still on the run. But there's just so many aspects of it where the dog throws me off completely. And of course, I will say it again, but I definitely want to hear y'all's theories on what happened. Y'all have been amazing about that. In the comments on YouTube, even if you listen anywhere else, or even the comments on Instagram too, please, please, please leave your theories of what you think happened, what could have happened, what brought him to this, where the heck he is. And obviously I will have the age progression pictures of him as well on the Instagram, because I definitely think that that should be plastered everywhere. If you do look at those age altered is what it's actually called, the age altered FBI wanted poster, he just looks like every guy you've ever met, like every white guy. It's so creepy. It is kind of funny. In one of them they gave him a mullet, but he looks like just anyone's uncle, any random neighbor, a guy you see at a gas station. It's very, very creepy, honestly, that he definitely someone who could blend in anywhere for sure. But like I said, Blue was found under the car, and he was hungry and in an agitated state. Like I said, he had little quills in his nose, so that's very sad. He was probably very, very scared. And then also the hat that Robert had been wearing in that video on the footage from the ATM that he had gone to before he skipped town. The hat, it was an Oakland Raiders hat, was in the car. And then also a pile of poop. So he just took a dump right before leaving, which is weird. Like, why poop right there? And it wasn't dog poop. The investigators said that it was human excrement, which is just human poopy. So that was strange that he just pooped like right there. You would think any like normal, obviously this man's not normal, but any person, I feel like you would like take a few steps out, like at least like count 3 trees. Like that's like the camping rule. You like count 3 trees and then pee or poop over there. But I think that just proves that he was not going to come back to the car at all. And then also the car was wiped down completely. There was absolutely no DNA, no fingerprints, no hair, nothing other than the big big dump he took next to the car. There was no evidence of him like actually being in the car, which is creepy, obviously, other than the hat, but you know what I mean, the actual physical evidence, except for one fingerprint on a coffee cup that was in the cup holder, or a cup of coffee rather, not a coffee cup. I believe it was like a tumbler kind of, or like a thermos. Now, police did search the area immediately around where the vehicle was discovered, and then they only searched one cave out of the dozens, literally like 30 caves around that area. And some of the caves are really complex, and it's like an underground network, and there's miles and miles underneath the ground. And a lot of professional cavers and people who were extremely familiar with that area did suggest that Fisher could have been using them to hide before actually escaping or unaliving himself or dying due to low oxygen levels. And then investigators have actually had professional cavers visit a lot of these caves many times in the years since the murders, and they've seen no sign of Fisher ever. No bones, no disturbed areas, no proof that he was ever there, or no, not even proof, just an indication, a sign, anything that he was in any of those caves. The car was also discovered less than a mile from the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, and that's an area that police never searched. And they did follow a set of footprints that led onto the reservation, but they didn't see any sign of Robert, which why would you not search that? It seems like investigators tried their best, I guess, gave it a good college try, but it seems like they really did miss the mark on this one. Then again, he had almost 12 hours ahead of them. Like that is insane. Really 10 hours, but with a 10-hour head start, he could have been in Mexico easily before the house even exploded. One thing that I found as well in my research of this case, where the car was parked, there were a bunch of pine trees around it. And with how the leaves had fallen and the needles had fallen and how the area was disrupted and disturbed around it, it seemed like the car hadn't been there overnight. It seemed like it had only been there for a few hours. So maybe he was 5-6 hours ahead of them, or maybe he was only like 2 hours ahead of them. Now, there have been a good amount of potential sightings. There was a couple that reported seeing a man that resembled Fisher walking along at the nearby Young Road several days before the discovery of the car. So that would be several days after the murder, since the car was discovered on the 20th and the murders happened on the 10th, or rather on the 9th, and then the explosion happened on the 10th. Now, according to them, when the woman saw him, she said to her husband, "That looks like Robert Fisher." However, they waited until the vehicle was found to report that tip, which is annoying. Lori Greenbeck, an acquaintance of the Fisher family, said that her husband had gone camping with Fisher in the area where the truck was found shortly before April 10th. She said that her husband believed that Fisher was scouting out the area. According to her, he was very familiar with the region. And that's what I actually think as well. I think that, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, he took a lot of things with him or didn't take things with him, or he only took a little bit of money. And I personally think that he would have had a go bag in that area hidden in one of the caves, and that's why he parked the car there. Again, I don't know why he took the dog. That seems dumb. If you're going to kill your whole family, why don't you just kill your dog as well? He didn't have any problem killing other dogs or other animals, so again, not sure why he brought the dog. On July 19th, a state arrest warrant was issued in Phoenix, charging Fisher for the 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of arson. He was declared a fugitive, and a federal arrest warrant was issued by the United States District Courts for the District of Arizona, charging him with unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, so running. On June 29th, 2002, so a full year later, Fisher was named by the FBI as the 475th fugitive to be placed on its 10 most wanted list. He was also on America's Most Wanted, the show, which is how, drum roll please, how the first person we went over in this series was caught, John List. Very interesting. It all comes back full circle. The FBI offers a reward up to $100,000 for information leading to Fisher's capture. By April 2003, which is 2 years after the murders, the FBI had received hundreds and hundreds of leads. However, all reported sightings of Fisher have been either inconclusive or false. Which inconclusive meaning it could have been something, but maybe the person didn't have enough information, or it just didn't lead anywhere. There was no conclusion. It was inconclusive. Not that you needed the definition of the word inconclusive, but now you have it. In the few years after his disappearance, some people living in his old neighborhood have reported seeing a man resembling him driving in the area, which would be very ballsy of him. In February 2004, 3 years after the murders, an individual with a striking resemblance of Fisher was arrested in Vancouver, Canada. Now, this is one of my favorite theories, which is crazy. However, it has been debunked, unfortunately. The man had a missing tooth where Fisher had a gold bicuspid, as well as a surgical scar on his back, which Fisher did have a surgery on his back and a scar in that same place. However, his fingerprints did not match. He was held by the Canadian police for about a week until a relative correctly identified him. A relative of the other person, not of Robert Fisher. Responding to speculation that his fingerprints had been altered, Scottsdale detective John Kirkham said there was no scarring to suggest this at all. Another little tidbit from the person who possibly could have been Robert Fisher in Vancouver. They had someone come in who knew Robert Fisher from back then, that's someone who obviously Robert Fisher would have recognized. And it looked as if though Robert was like scanning the room, like looking around. And when he saw that person and laid eyes on him, he did a double take. And it looked like the person who he had seen that they had brought in to see him, or planted rather. That man said that it looked as if though, quote, Robert, or the person they think was Robert, it looked like his heart had dropped when he saw him. And that's really one thing where when I read that, I was like, that if it wasn't him, like what? And then they said that his fingerprints didn't match Robert's fingerprints, and that, well, they could have, changed his fingerprints. And then also on the other side of that, I keep thinking in the back of my head, well, what if there was just like a human error where maybe they got the fingerprints mixed up with someone else? Or I would say like, oh, he burned them off, but then he just wouldn't have any fingerprints, and that would be really obvious. That is one of my favorite theories, though. 11 years after the murders, the FBI alerted local law enforcement that Robert may be living in the Payson area in Arizona, and nothing came of that. And then In October 2014, police raided a house in Commerce City, Colorado, still in that like same general area of the US, but in Colorado after receiving a tip that he was hiding there. Despite arresting 2 occupants, they did not find any sign of him. And then 2 years after that, FBI officials and Scottsdale police displayed new aged-enhanced photos of Fisher during a news conference on the 15-year anniversary of the murders. And these are the ones where I said it looks just like every white guy you've met, or, you know, a guy you see walking out of the gas station, or just a guy walking down the street. He just looks so generic. And obviously, I mean, I guess that works for him because we haven't found him yet. On November 3rd, 2021, so 6-ish months ago, Fisher was removed from the FBI top 10 most wanted list. He was replaced by the alleged leader of MS-13 in Honduras, which is crazy that that's who bumped him off the list. Now, even though he was removed from that list, he still remains a wanted fugitive. So don't get it twisted. He's still needs to be caught. He's still a fugitive, and the case is still ongoing. Now, like I said, there are so many, absolutely so many theories and just so much speculation, and it's absolutely split. You know, it's not like most people or majority think one thing and another think another thing. I was looking all over on Reddit and comment sections, other podcast comment sections, other outlets as well, and it's either he killed himself or he's still on the run. But then there's other people who actually think that he did get mad at his wife. Obviously, they had that big blowout fight. And a lot of the times after their big blowout fights, family members and neighbors confirm this, that he would then they wouldn't figure it out. He would just run off and go hunting. He would run away to the woods. So that's what a lot of people think happened, that he ran away to the woods, and then with the dog, because a lot of times he would take Blue, the best boy ever, he would take him on his little hunting trips. And a lot of people think that he then saw somewhere that he on the news or something, which I don't know how he would see that if he was hunting, but that he saw on the news that his home had exploded and his family was dead, and that maybe he was scared that, they would blame him if he came back. But the thing is that if he had proof that he was out there and that he was hunting out there, then you wouldn't have been a suspect. But of course, people are wrongly convicted all the time, even if they do have an alibi. So I guess that checks out. And that could be a reason why he brought the dog with him, right? And I know I keep going back to the dog, but again, it just doesn't make sense. Why bring your dog with you if you've just killed your family? You're planning on blowing up the house. You've rigged that to happen. And now you're going to escape with your dog. You're going to drive out there and bring your dog with you. Maybe the dog had just seen so much stuff happen that he was like, I'm not going with you, and just stayed at the car. And Robert got annoyed and just left without him and knew, like, okay, I have limited time. Fine. You just stay here. They'll find you. You'll be okay. But I also think that maybe I don't know why he would have just brought the dog randomly, but he brought the dog for whatever reason, and then realized I can't bring him with me because then people will recognize me with the dog. Like, that would be a dead giveaway. For instance, if I was going to run away from my family or start a new life, I wouldn't be able to get away with it if I brought Wiggum with me. Clearly, that would be a dead giveaway. Or also maybe he was thinking that the dog would slow him down, and, he couldn't take the dog into these little caves and things like that. So again, I don't know why he brought the dog, but a lot of people do think that he probably went out there and committed suicide in the forest. But I don't think that he did, because I personally think that if he was going to kill himself and that was part of the plan, he would have just done it there. There have been family annihilators who have killed themselves. Actually, we have gone over one of them already, Marty Bergen. He did it right after he killed his entire family, except for his father. He didn't kill his father, but that was obviously a different scenario. He was schizophrenic. Some people think that he also maybe died in the woods of natural causes, or was like eaten by a bear, or got lost, but he was very familiar with that area. He typically, if you are a hunter or are known as an outdoorsman or a woodsman, you do have some tracking abilities. I don't think he would have gotten lost. I think that he would be able to live off the land. And I think he did that for a while, or maybe is still even doing that. It does seem like he really did enjoy doing that as well. And I do think that he had a go bag stashed out there, since he was out there in that specific area a few days before. That would have been very smart of him to do. Now, if he did survive, it is thought that it's possible that he hitchhiked out of the area or had help from an accomplice, from a girlfriend, from someone that he was maybe sleeping around with, since it is known that he had more than one night stand with multiple different people. And there have been a few unconfirmed sightings of him and a female that they, had sketchy behavior, looked like, they were just, going in somewhere, trying to use the bathroom, getting something quick to eat, putting their head down, not wanting to cause any commotion or anything like that. There is a theory that Fisher may have used his survival skills to continue living in the wilderness near Payson, where his wife's car was discovered. Like I said, he had been pretty familiar with that area, but police and even survival experts are skeptical due to the difficulty of finding food and shelter in that environment, as well as the fact that no evidence ever emerged of someone living in the woods in that area. Other detectives and investigators have said that he could be living in a small town where he gets just paid cash to work as a handyman, or he could be in a big city where he blends in. And many people do think that he possibly crossed the southern border, and Robert did disappear before the 9/11 attacks, although it was that same year, it was earlier in the year, where it was a lot easier to cross borders. And even so, it's still to this day easier to go into Mexico than it is to get out of it. But either way, at that time, it probably would have been much, much easier for him to get into Mexico and then just cross border after border to get away. A hostile encounter occurred in Guatemala in 2009, so 8 years after, between tourists and a man said to resemble Fisher. And that's what a lot of people have said, where he probably is. Living in a small town down in a country in Central America, doing work for cash, and really just living off the grid, essentially. FBI agent Bobby Caldwell's sense of his personality and habits is that he's arrogant, he's cocky, he's a know-it-all, and he's a loner. Fisher had been known to chew tobacco, his favorite, the Copenhagen brand, and his look has been described as average, but sometimes odd in the way that he walks, in an erect manner with his chest out, stemming from the back injury that he had from being a firefighter. He was an avid hunter and fisherman, as we discussed, and he's considered extremely dangerous and armed, and he also has ties to Florida and New Mexico. One of the detectives on the case said, "Maybe this is the best we have, knowing he did it and never finding him again." So like I said, I personally do think that he is still alive, living off the land, living in some little podunk town, living off the grid, which a lot of people can do. I even read on one Reddit thread where people were giving their theories. Someone was saying that he was stationed, he was in the military, and he was stationed in an area has some like mountains and wooded areas where people live up on the mountain, and they like pretty much live off the land and rarely come down to the town to get any supplies or anything they need. But when they do, it's typically like one weekend of the month that they'll come down. And he was saying that he saw someone who looked very, very, very similar to Robert William Fisher. And he even said that he was like walking weird. And when the guy who was writing this comment got back in his car, he, kind of followed him just a little bit, and he was looking out for certain things that really raised red flags to him. And he said that he never saw that person again after that. So red flags all over. Like I said, I will have all of the pictures, the age progressed pictures that the FBI put out on my Instagram page, the Down a Rabbit Hole podcast on Instagram. We'll also do a little bit of trivia on the day that this one is released. If you have any suggestions for other episodes, any other cases you'd like me to go over, definitely let me know. And of course, please let me know your theories as well. I think that it is absolutely fascinating to theorize on this one because it is very, very, very interesting. As always, thanks for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of Down a Rabbit Hole with me, your host, CCSUAREZ. Remember to not ignore red flags. Don't you do that. And stay spicy. Thank you again for listening to this episode of Down a Rabbit Hole with CCSUAREZ. Please follow us on Instagram at Down a Rabbit Hole Podcast. And if you have any suggestions, anything you'd like to share, we can be contacted at downarabbitholepodcast@gmail.com. All of that is linked in the show notes, wherever you listen to your podcasts, and then also in the description box on the CCSUAREZ YouTube channel as well. All sources for this episode, of course, are linked down below. If you do have a chance, please go ahead and rate and review on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. The Down a Rabbit Hole podcast is produced, written, and researched by Chelsea Suarez and Tony Suarez. Executive producer, Wiggum Suarez. Also, as always, a huge thank you to our channel members on YouTube. Without you, this podcast would not even exist. So thank you so much to our YouTube channel members. If you would like to become a YouTube channel member, go ahead and go over to the CCSUAREZ YouTube channel and click the join button right next to the subscribe button. As always, we appreciate you. Please pay attention to red flags and stay spicy, and we'll see you in our next episode.